I have degrees from Stanford University in creative writing and journalism, and for the past decade, I've been working on documentary films for outlets such as HBO, Hulu, and National Geographic. In this video, I'm going to bring all of that story knowledge to bear to break down the 7 key steps of story structure that you can use to bring your documentary films or narrative projects to the next level. The most common story structure you'll hear people talk about is the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a 12-step process that is the backbone of many great stories. But as a documentarian, I don't find it very helpful. I find the hero's journey to be too prescriptive and not always relevant to nonfiction work. And that's why I wanted to share a different framework with you all that I find more helpful. The cool thing about this framework is that the 7 steps that we're going to go through aren't arbitrarily imposed on a story. They exist in the story. And what I mean by that is that the 7 steps are the steps that any character must go through to solve a problem and change as a result. The 7 steps are less about plot and more about how a character experiences the type of change in storytelling that is so powerful. This framework comes from the world of screenwriting and narrative filmmaking. Shout out John Truby. And while not everything perfectly translates to documentaries, we can learn a lot from the principles. As we go along, I'm going to map the framework onto the Oscar-winning documentary, My Octopus Teacher. Then, after we finish going through the 7 steps, I'm going to talk directly to the nonfiction filmmakers out there about the best way to use the framework. Step 1, weakness and need. Here's the TLDR on this step. I'll keep it as simple as possible to start, and then we'll dive into the nuances for those who love to think about this story structure stuff. At the beginning of a story, a character faces a problem that highlights their weaknesses and a deep, unfulfilled need. Okay, now let's go into the details. All good stories begin with a problem. Your main character is in trouble in some way. Now, you may be thinking, Austin, why do we have to start with the negative? Well, it's not really that we want to start negative with a problem just to start negative. It's just that when a character is faced with a problem, it helps define who they are very quickly. When a character's life is in crisis, we get to see their weaknesses. We get to see their needs or what is missing on a deeper level in life. And that's what sets the story in motion. So what do I mean by weakness and need? Well, when you begin a story, your main character should be held back by a significant weakness or weaknesses. There's something missing inside them that is so profound that it negatively impacts their life. The need is what the main character must fulfill within themselves to improve their life. To do this, they will have to overcome their weaknesses and grow in a meaningful way. All right, now to illustrate these concepts, let's look at the documentary, My Octopus Teacher. At the beginning of the movie, Craig Foster's weakness is that he is physically and emotionally disconnected. He's exhausted, burnt out, and it leaves him feeling disconnected from nature and his family. His need is to be revitalized, to find a sense of wonder and excitement in the world again, both towards nature and towards his role as a father. So as you can see there, a weakness and a need are very closely linked. Now, there are 2 types of needs that you should be aware of. The first is called a psychological need. A psychological need involves overcoming a serious flaw that is hurting nobody but the main character. Think of it like a selfish need. So in My Octopus Teacher, Craig Foster's psychological need is to reconnect with nature so that he feels revitalized again. The second type of need is called a moral need. Think of it like a generous need. A character with a moral need is always hurting others in some way. It is their moral weakness and needing to learn how to treat other people. In My Octopus Teacher, Craig's moral need is to be more empathetic, both towards animals and his son. Because it implicates other people, moral needs raise the stakes of stories. And when characters have both psychological and moral needs, they are more complex and more impactful. Step 2, desire. Desire is what your character wants. It's their goal. A story doesn't become interesting until a desire is revealed. Desire is what, on the surface, the story is about. The audience is aware of it the whole time. It's like the roller coaster ride of the story that they and the main character are on. But desire is different from what the character needs, which we just talked about in step 1. A need is about overcoming an internal weakness. A desire is about achieving an external goal. A need lets the audience see how the character must change as a person. A desire lets the audience see what the character is going to do that will lead to that personal change. The need is under the surface, while the desire is on the surface and what the audience thinks the story is about. All right, so going back to our example, my octopus teacher, Craig's need is to reconnect with nature in order to feel energized about life and fatherhood. His desire is to learn to track an octopus underwater, and by going into the ocean every day, build a relationship with her.
I had to have a radical change in my life. And the only way I knew to do it was to be in this ocean with her. And then I had this crazy idea. What happens if I just went every day?
Step 3, opponent. A lot of people think that opponents in stories are people who are evil. But I want you to think of opponents based on how they function in a story. An opponent not only wants to prevent the main character from achieving their desire, but they are also competing with them for the same goal. Notice how this is linked to the previous step around desire. The opponent is the person who wants to keep the main character from achieving their goal. And structurally, it's important that the opponent wants the same goal because it draws the main character and opponent into direct conflict with each other, which creates a drama that audiences love. Opponents are much more obvious in narrative films when you can create a Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker out of your imagination. But opponents do play a critical role in documentaries as well. In the Oscar-winning documentary Navalny, for example, the opponent is the Russian government, Putin, who is literally trying to kill Navalny and preserve authoritarian rule in the country. In My Octopus Teacher, the opponent is a bit more abstract, but I would argue that the opponent is the dangerous ocean ecosystem. It's the dangerous diving conditions that threaten Craig, and the predators in the water that threaten to kill the octopus. The sharks, like Craig, also want to be close to the octopus, and if the sharks succeed, they're gonna kill the octopus, and Craig won't be able to build a relationship with her. Step 4, plan. The plan is the set of strategies that the main character will use to overcome the opponent and reach their goal. This is typically the middle of the story. It's the action taken to overcome the opponent. In My Octopus Teacher, Craig's plan is daily immersion in the environment, learning and anticipating the ecosystem's dynamics, and documenting the octopus's survival strategies. It is the daily practice of becoming immersed in the underwater world. Step 5, battle. Throughout the story, the main character and opponent go back and forth as they each try to reach the goal. The battle is the final conflict between the main character and opponent that determines which one of the two characters achieves the goal. Again, in narrative films, this might be more obvious, but in great documentaries, you can still find it. In My Octopus Teacher, the final battle occurs when the octopus faces a life or death encounter with a shark. As Craig watches on helplessly, the octopus outsmarts the shark using a complex strategy of evasion and camouflage. At this moment, the octopus wins her battle, while Craig also achieves his goal of understanding the octopus when he sees her deploy a remarkable camouflaging behavior that set him on this journey of discovery at the beginning of the story. Step 6, self-revelation. After the battle, the main character has a major self-revelation about who they really are. Structurally, the self-revelation connects directly back to the need. These two steps communicate the character change of your protagonist. Need is the beginning of the main character's change, and self-revelation is the endpoint of that change. Need is the mark of the main character's immaturity at the beginning of the story. Self-revelation is the moment when the main character grows as a human being. It is what they learn, what they gain, what allows them to live a better life in the future. So in our example, Craig's initial need was to reconnect with nature in order to feel energized about life and fatherhood like he used to be. His self-revelation at the end of the movie? Well, it's pretty much laid out in the movie's trailer.
I hadn't been a person that was overly sentimental towards animals before. I realized I was changing. My relationship with people, with humans, was changing. What she taught me was to feel that you're part of this place, not a visitor. That's a huge difference.
And finally, we arrive at step 7, new equilibrium. When we reach the new equilibrium, everything is back to normal, except there's one major difference. The main character has evolved to either a higher or lower level as a result of going through all the ups and downs of the story. A permanent change has occurred in the character. In our example, after the octopus dies in the movie, Craig returns to his normal life. He isn't going back out into the water every day to track the octopus, and in the documentary, his first line after the death sequence reveals his new equilibrium. He says, quote, "One of the most exciting things in my life, taking my son, walking along the shore, and just showing him the wonders of nature. I was getting so much from the wild that I could now give. I had so much energy to give back." And there you have it. His transformation is complete, both in how he has satisfied his own personal need and also his moral need of how he is treating other people like his son. Now, to all my fellow documentarians out there, I really don't want you to get intimidated by structure. I don't want you to feel boxed in by any of this. It's hard enough doing what we do, following a story in real time and trying to make sense of it. We are dealing with very different circumstances compared to screenwriters. I mean, screenwriters, playwrights, novelists, they often start writing the end of the story first. They start with a character's self-revelation and then work back to the beginning to determine character needs and desires. Well, we usually don't have that luxury in documentaries. So then why is this whole framework valuable? Because it works. And if we have these steps in mind, it can help point us in the direction of how to craft our documentaries so that they aren't just some stories about some person who is doing an interesting thing. And that's the whole documentary. If you take anything away from this video, focus on these 3 things. 1, when you're thinking about structure, think about that interplay between desire and need. In other words, think about what's above the surface and what's below the surface. What does the audience think the story is about? And what is the story really about on a deeper level? Let's push our documentaries to be working on those multiple levels of depth. 2, find an opponent. I will admit, this can be very tough in the doc world. Oftentimes in docs, the opponent trying to impede the main character from reaching their goal is abstract. But the docs that do have a clearly defined opponent often stand apart as particularly impactful. Take a documentary like The Territory from Nat Geo, which documents the fight of an indigenous tribe in the Amazon against encroaching deforestation. It would have been really easy for the filmmakers to just follow the tribe fighting deforestation, with the farmers and illegal settlers who destroyed the habitat being an abstract opponent that we hear about but don't see. But director Alex Pritz actually got access to film with the farmers and settlers. He built up the opponent, showing these two competing forces in a visceral way that took his documentary to the next level. And 3, document change. So many docs are just, hey, I pointed a camera at this person who I think is interesting. The character doesn't actually have a need to fulfill, and they never have a self-revelation. They don't change. And I promise you, if you can focus on how your character changes, if that truly comes through in your story, you are going to love how it resonates with audiences. For more deep dives on story structure, check out this video on story shapes and plot. Go out and tell some stories.